Welcome to the Masters of Wellness podcast. Today, you will learn how peak states are trainable, not mystical VIP access. Why most performance issues are state and environment issues, not laziness. And you'll walk away with 2 micro practices and a 7-day challenge you can actually follow. A quick disclaimer, today is educational, no diagnosing online, no cure claims. If anything comes up, work with a qualified professional. If you're listening while drinking coffee and still tired, welcome. You're not broken. You're just running the wrong operating system for the job. For thousands of years, mystics described elevated states, peace, clarity, awe. Now we've got MRI and EEG tools that can map brain patterns in those states. And here's the plot twist. They often look a lot like flow. So today we're treating peak states like a skill, not a belief system. A skill. Worst case, you breathe for 60 seconds and become 4% less spicy in your next meeting. Welcome to the Masters of Wellness podcast, where we explore the latest insights, personal journeys, and business innovations shaping the future of health and well-being. I'm Edward Curtin, 30 plus years in the wellness industry, joined by co-host of Curiosity, Chuck Smith, helping leaders bring goals to reality. Today, we're joined by Dawson Church, a science writer, researcher, founder of EFT Universe. He's been involved in over 100 peer-reviewed studies and created the Veterans Stress Solution, supporting more than 22,000 veterans and family members. Dawson, welcome.
Chuck, Edward, what a pleasure to be here. And if we have half as much fun on air as we've just had off air, it's going to be a fabulous time.
Our promise for today, no hype. We're pulling out the practical insights and the try it today tools so listeners can test this in real life starting today. A quick frame, Dawson. Some people hear peak state and think monks and mountains and incense. Other people hear it and think, yeah, that sounds cool, but I've got 47 emails and back-to-back Zoom meetings. So we're here to unpack those belief systems to find the practical answers today. Now, before we go into science, let's go back to the origin story, Mr. Dawson Church. What was the first moment you thought, hang on, there's something real here?
A couple that really struck me were, I wasn't a particularly happy person growing up. I was a pretty miserable kid. There was a lot of turmoil in my family. I was a suicidal teenager. And I remember the one thing that I think really made a difference was that when I was around 13, I was lying in my bed one day. I was incredibly just sick with depression. And suddenly I found myself floating in the middle of the cosmos, surrounded by stars. And I felt as though the nature of the universe was love. And that experience was a powerful wake up call because I didn't know that that was possible. And so from that point on, I at least knew that that existed. Now, could I get back there? No. Did I know anything about what that meant? No. Did it make my life a lot better? No. I was still pretty miserable when I came back to Earth. At least I knew there was a there. And so I then joined a spiritual community in my teenage years. I learned to meditate, learned energy healing, eventually wound up in book publishing. But that pivotal moment was really formative. It turns out that many people who are depressed, many children, many teenagers have these peak experiences like that. And the chances are everybody listening is at some point you've been sticking your fingers into the moss on the side of a riverbank and felt one with the universe, or you've held your baby, or you've watched the sunset. You've seen, today I saw deer running through the woods as I was bicycling. I mean, something has happened to everyone that's shown them that there's a there. And so the big question is, how do we get back to those peak states, which of course is what this hour is all about. So we've all been into a clinic or a hospital and seeing people hooked up to devices. Maybe an EKG to measure your heart, could be an EEG to measure your brain waves. There are all kinds of things we use to measure energy fields in the body. And what hardly anybody knows, I talk about this in my books, but in 1898, a young German cavalry officer was on an exercise with his unit, and his horse reared up. He was towing a big, huge, heavy gun, weighed several tons. His horse reared up, threw him under the wheels of the gun carriage. As it was about to crush him, his fellow soldiers grabbed the carriage and stopped it, and just managed to avoid him getting sliced in half. And this young man, his name was Hans Berger, he went back very, very shaken to the barracks, and there was a telegram there for him. That was 1898, and telegrams were very unusual back then. And it was his father saying, "How are you?" And it was like really weird because his father had never sent him a telegram before. So he went back home a couple of days later and talked to his whole family what had happened. And it turned out that at the moment he was about to get crushed by the wagon wheel, his sister had felt an incredible sense of premonition and felt as though something terrible was happening to him, screamed, told the father, and the father had sent the telegram. And he wondered, how on earth could my sister have known 100 kilometers away from me that I was in grave danger? So he set out to study the brain. And he wound up inventing the EEG, the electroencephalograph, and he measured these brain waves in people. So that was how this got going. People didn't realize it was the result all of these measurements, all of these elaborate machines we have now are a result of people trying to figure out these incredible abilities of the human brain and the human mind to coordinate and communicate over long distances. And so, what we initially began to do was find pathology. We hooked up epileptics, we hooked up people
You can
who had brain abnormalities, their brain function. But what then happened is around 1960, a couple of brain scientists said, what if we hook up gurus? What if we hook up people who are spiritual masters? And they began to study people who were Qigong healers, people who were spiritual faith healers, Christian energy healers, Jewish Kabbalistic healers. And what they found was that they all had this highly unusual characteristic brainwave. Then that guy, his name was Maxwell Cade. When he was retiring, he passed his mantle along to a associate of his, Anna Wise, and she began to hook up high performers, symphony conductors, great scientists, business people. And she was amazed to discover the exact same brainwave pattern. And they call this the awakened mind. So meditators, healers, people in elevated states of oneness of the universe have the awakened mind pattern. But what very few people realize is when you are in that valley watching the sunset and you go into this blissful state of oneness with the universe, you have the awakened mind pattern as well. And that's the peak state. So it's a little mini recap of these states that these meditators who've spent often 10,000 hours or more, they've been reaching those states. They are in those states much of the time. Everyone's in those states part of the time. And that is the characteristic brainwave, the awakened mind pattern of the peak state. We have a ton of alpha waves in that state. We have a lot of slow waves, delta waves at the bottom of the EEG readout in that state. And we have a lot of gamma, the wave of creativity, inspiration, joy, and integration going on as well. So a peak state is a little recap for a little while of those experiences of oneness with the universe.
Is this why some people chase fake versions of this state,
Yeah.
chemicals and alcohols and things like that?
Absolutely. And I read a really sad story in the San Francisco Chronicle. It's doing a series on fentanyl addiction. And it was about a man in his 20s. He's been homeless for a while. And he has all this, this obstruction in his digestive tract as a result of taking fentanyl. And he went in for surgery where they had to open up his whole inside and unblock his digestive tract, and they sewed him up, discharged him. And in the story, he goes right back out that day to get another hit of fentanyl. So you watch people who are drug addicted to opioids, to alcohol, to binge eating, all kinds of things. In fact, I talk a lot about in my books about cortisol and how people get addicted to their own cortisol, their own stress hormones. And so what all of these people fail to realize, I mean, people going and doing ayahuasca journeys, ecstasy, magic mushroom, psilocybin, all of these only work because they mimic the action of endogenous molecules produced by the brain. THC, there are 100,000 molecules in hemp. Why does THC work? It works because it fits with neuroreceptors in our brains that are designed to not for THC, they're designed for another neurotransmitter called anandamide, and they just happen to fit the same, like lock and key, fit the same spot. So people who are looking for these highs, they're wonderful. But what happens when people meditate deeply is their brains are flooded with anandamide. Study published very recently showed that people in deep meditation can have a 70% rise in anandamide, this neurotransmitter, endogenously. Their brain just produces lots of it. Serotonin and dopamine. Dopamine is the main pleasure hormone that people are craving that when they take heroin and cocaine and fentanyl, but dopamine rises up to 65% in our brains if we meditate right. So effective meditation is flooding your brain with these pleasure hormones and neurochemicals, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, nitric oxide, beta endorphin, anandamide. And so, I mean, when you meditate for a while, I do meditation retreats with people, they wind up after like 20, 30 minutes, they're just sitting there where they are totally stoned. They are unbelievably stoned. They're like somebody who's on a drug trip. And they, of course, they start to have these amazing experiences of body integration, of trauma healing. And they really are on all of these neurotransmitters, but they're all endogenous to the human body. They're in safe doses. They aren't coming from outside with a whole bunch of impurities and pollutants. And so I just love the way we have these ecstatic states available to us. And that's, people don't realize that you can generate these through these elevated states of consciousness. That's why they go and look for the drug out there. But if you realize the kinds of drugs that your brain can produce and the levels of drugs those are capable that those dosages are capable of giving you, you very soon lose all interest in outside addictive substances because you're getting such good stuff from the inside.
Are there other emotions or things on the scoreboard, so to speak, that indicate to us that we are heading towards or we are in a higher state, such as if I'm in the office and I'm really, really focused and able to make great decisions, or I have great sleep quality for a few days? Like, are these also indicators that we are heading in that direction?
Yeah, so flow is the secular cousin of the spiritual experiences in meditation. And even atheists who have no interest or movement toward those elevated states, one study of people entering these states found that atheists were as likely to experience them as agnostics or religious people or spiritual people. The only people who experienced them less were highly religious people. They tended to shut them down, but most people move into these states, and that's flow. And so the characteristic of flow is that you become so absorbed in the task you're doing that you have time distortion. Time seems to fly by very, very quickly, or it becomes very, very slow. So your sense of time gets distorted. You are so deeply into what you're doing, you forget about the world around you. You might forget to eat or sleep or drink or do other activities because you are so completely absorbed in what you're doing. Watch a child at play. I just love watching children. I mean, they get completely immersed into what they're doing. We want you to learn to play like a child. We want you to learn to laugh like a child and essentially have the childlike curiosity and liberation that you knew when you were 2, 3, and 5. We get shut down as adults. The average adult laughs about 20 times a day. The average 3-year-old, 2-year-old laughs about 300 times a day. So you want to be reconnecting with your flow, reconnecting with those states. You become highly creative. In one of my studies, we found people's creativity pretty much doubled as they were moving into these kinds of spaces. Their productivity in I wondered at a certain point a few years back. I mean, with bringing people to all these elevated states, are they becoming detached, disengaged from work and family and what they are doing in their material lives? So I did a productivity study, and we found that in 21 days, and it's fine to do it for 7 days, but I want you doing it for 21 days. In 21 days, their productivity at work went up. That's like getting an extra day of the week. It went up 20% in only 3 weeks doing this. So you become much more productive. You are in these flow states more often, and your resilience improves, your creativity improves, your happiness level goes way, way, way up. In my newest book, which is called Spiritual Intelligence, I look at the research on meditators, really long term experienced meditators, and they can have levels of happiness as measured by gamma. Gamma is the key wave in the brain of integration, creativity, joy, optimism, awe, gratitude, compassion. That brain wave can go up 25 times the baseline in these meditators. So these people are hitting these elevated levels of bliss. And that again causes a huge chain reaction of downstream gene expression and also molecular expression in their bodies. They're way, way, way healthier, and they have dramatically longer lives as well as a result of this. So it's catalyzing all these positive changes in your life. And that's really the way we're meant to live. And what you I know care about, what I care about, what we all care about is lifting the burdens that stop people from living the life that literally our brains are designed to work this way. Naturally, we produce all these ecstasy neurotransmitters. Our brains naturally go into the awakened mind. The Buddha called that natural mind. He said this natural state of mind. So that's really our business here is in reintroducing people into the fact that we are these remarkable, unlimited beings and encouraging them to practice the things that bring them out of their little boxes of misery and discomfort and share the glorious lives they're meant to have.
I'm getting goosebumps already this early in the show, Dawson. I do have a question, which I'm going to make a note of it because I want to ask it later. It's not appropriate right now, but I've made a note of that because you just brought something up there and I want to address that. Now, let's look at the science. When you talked about MRI and EEG, I do know what MRI is. I'm not quite sure what EEG is. Do you mind explaining those two? And then what do you see when you use these tools in your research?
So the EEG measures brain waves. It typically has little electrodes on the skull. One of the most popular ones is the Muse headband, which you put on your forehead. It has little electrodes which are measuring your frontal lobes, which give you certain information, not a lot of information, but enough to be meaningful. Usually, when I'm working with people minimally, I'll attach electrodes to the back of the skull, and we'll be working with the visual cortex, the visual centers of the brain. And then a full EEG cap will be that, you've seen people usually in science experiments where they have a whole bunch of electrodes all over their head. That's a full electrode set. So those are measuring brain waves, and they're using electricity, the electrical transmissions from the brain, and they're in several flavors from slow to fast. And so these are used in sleep research, and we know in deep sleep our brains slow way down into what's called delta. In normal activity, they're in what's called beta. In rest, they're in alpha. So we know about all of these EEG states. Eyes are giant electromagnets. Think about just a regular horseshoe-shaped magnet. Well, make that 100 times bigger, and you have this giant horseshoe big enough where you can slide a human being right into it on a flat surface, and then you're measuring the all kinds of things about their brain and also their body if you're doing a body MRI. And so that's going to pick up all these magnetic fields, and you can tell what's going on, which parts of the brain are active. You can also measure brain volume, and that is something you can't do easily with the EEG. So this is important because when you fire a neural bundle, you wire it. And so the bundles you fire the most, you wire, and those bundles get bigger. And so, in one of the case histories in spiritual intelligence, this TV host called Graham Phillips, who had a TV show, wanted to learn about meditation, but he had a TV crew. So he took the whole crew into an advanced MRI lab and they did a whole workup on him, including a brain volume scan. So now they're using an MRI to measure every single part of his brain down to the last neuron and how big those parts are. He then began to meditate for the first time in his life. He felt way better. After 2 weeks, he was less irritable. After 2 months, he went back in the lab. They remeasured his brain, and certain parts of the brain had grown by 2 or 3, 4%. And again, this is only in 2 months, 8 weeks. One part of his brain to do with emotion regulation, the emotion regulation core of the brain, called the dentate gyrus, that part of his brain grew by 22.8% in 2 months. Now you think about that. I mean, imagine if I began to go to the gym and my deltoids grew by 22.8% in 2 months. I'd be pretty happy. I make very, very slow progress in the gym. But our brains are on the boil. Our brains are growing in some regions so quickly. So MRIs measure brain volume. And what you look for in meditators is what's changing. And what we find changing in meditators is that after a while, the hippocampus, the emotion, memory, and learning center gets bigger. And that dentate gyrus is part of the hippocampus. So that structure of the brain gets larger. The prefrontal lobes, prefrontal cortex, those get larger. The cortex, the outer layer of the brain, increases in mass over time in people doing these kinds of activities, and other parts shrink. The main part that shrinks in meditators over time is the amygdala, the brain's stress center that gets smaller, and also the nucleus accumbens, the addiction center, the part that governs that grows cravings for chocolate chip cookies and ice cream and cigarettes and fentanyl might be. And that part of the brain starts to shrink because they aren't using it. So MRIs measure those parts of the brain, both functionally, structurally, and the volume of them, so we can tell what's going on. And that's a really valuable tool because we used to know people felt better if they meditate and take care of themselves. And that it's great to have that report. Oh, my anxiety is lower, my depression is less, my physical pain's gone down, I'm feeling happier, very, very nice. And I feel it's wonderful to work with people and see those changes. But when you're staring, I remember my very first MRI study I did, a randomized controlled trial, and we saw in 1 month of people doing an evidence-based meditation method called eco meditation. And in 1 month, the scans came back from the lab, and I and the other researchers were looking at them, and we couldn't believe our eyes. In 1 month, the structure and function of those brains had changed. So these are giving us valuable information about the physiological shifts that these practices are producing. They're not just making us feel better; they are literally changing our brains and our bodies at the most fundamental levels.
My mind is immediately going to how do the results change if and when the person that's being studied or the group that's being studied is having a hard time maybe being a good meditator? How do they control the group so that everyone's style of meditation is maybe the same so that the information is kind of controlled?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chuck, because our brains are not designed to be still. Meditation is about stilling your mind and quietening your body. And that's just not at all the way our bodies were designed by evolution. I have a bird feeder outside my office, and I look out the window, and the birds are there, and they're landing on the bird feeder, and they peck at a sunflower seed, and then they look up, they look to the left, the right, they look down, they peck another seed. I mean, they are like eating mindfully. We're taught to be eating mindfully. Take a deep breath, savor your food, be present with the meal experience. Those birds are not eating mindfully. They're the opposite. They're totally distracted. They're looking all over the place. Why? Because also in my yard, there's a hawk, and the hawk circles around, and every once in a while it swoops down and tries to grab a bird. Below the bird feeder, there's a cat. And the cat is very agile. And the cat's lifetime ambition is to become an Olympic athlete cat where it can jump up onto a bird feeder and grab a bird. And every once in a while it succeeds. So evolution designed us to be highly alert, scanning the horizon for threats 24/7, even in sleep, where part of our brain is still listening for that bad thing. So when the meditation teacher, like joined a spiritual community when I was 15 years old, went and lived on a ashram, and meditation teacher says, close your eyes and still your mind. I thought, well, I can do the close your eyes part. Still your mind. I've been meditating for over 50 years. I still can't still my mind. How's that for failure? So I'm a worse failure than you, Chuck. I get an award. So what I did many years ago is I said, okay, we know that certain physiological cues put us into parasympathetic vagal nerve dominance. And we know what those are. We know that slow breathing does that. We know that heart coherence does that. We know that EFT, tapping on acupressure points, does that. We know that mindfulness does that. So I designed a little group of 5 of those things. I called it eco meditation. And then after a few years, we noticed people were really using this method. And so we began to do studies on it. And eco meditation doesn't require you to believe anything or have any philosophy or follow a guru or a spiritual teaching. It just says, slow your breathing down. 6 seconds per in breath, 6 seconds per out breath. That'll put you in heart your mind. You breathe slowly, relax certain muscles. There are certain muscle groups which when you relax them, you just kick your whole body involuntarily into parasympathetic vagal dominance. So we have people do that. And this whole little routine takes 5 minutes. And we just watch them. Non-meditators, failed meditators like me, just drop way, way, way down. Because again, they're all based on physiological evidence-based cues. So that's what we use. That's what we study. It's a standardized form. It works for virtually everybody who tries it. And they're very surprised that, but again, they're using evidence-based stuff. They're not using, 10,000-year-old speculation about what works. They're using something that we've developed in a lab, or we've tested in a lab, and we know it's effective. So that's what we do. We need to use an evidence-based meditation. Some meditations, ones that require your mind to still, your body, very, very difficult and are trying to counteract evolution. And when you try and counteract 3.4 billion years of evolution, you have a very difficult job ahead of you. It's free online. We've
Yep.
been on we're free online forever. It's ECO, just Eco Meditation, ecomeditation.com. Download the free track there and use it. And again, that we found that 30 days of eco meditation is able to produce literal, measurable structural changes in the brain that we can detect in an MRI. Your main seat of suffering, it's called your mid-prefrontal cortex. It's where you build your sense of self. It's where rumination and worry live in your brain. It's right behind your forehead. We found that in 30 days of eco meditation, the mid-prefrontal cortex was quiet, and the compassion and gratitude centers of the brain were highly lit up in those people in that group. So it doesn't take long, 30 days, and it's producing structural and functional changes in the brain.
What is the difference between bliss or healthy pleasure and numbing out? We had an episode going back a few months ago talking about watching Netflix for the whole weekend as a form of pleasure, but also possibly just to numb out. Like, how do you differentiate those, and how do we know when we're leaning towards one or the other?
Research has looked at this, and the kind of technical name they use is hedonic pleasure. And that's like my wife's birthday is coming up, so I'm thinking about the chocolate cake and I'm salivating. That's hedonic pleasure, or watching your favorite show, or just just enjoyable things, hugging your grandkids or whatever it might be. And then there's eudaimonic pleasure, and that is the pleasure that comes from that part of the brain that is responsible, that mediates gratitude or joy, compassion, optimism, all these positive kinds of these pro-social emotions. And they have a very, very different effect on your body. So if they look at the downstream gene expression after you're having those experiences, it feels good to have hedonic pleasure. But when you have pleasure beyond the self, like what we see in monks and nuns and long-term meditators, is that they are having a sense of connection beyond the self. And typically, like for me, that means sitting down in the morning in meditation, and I'm picturing wonderful examples of love, of kindness, of compassion. I'm picturing saints, Anandamayi Ma, Ramakrishna, Ramana Maharshi, Jesus, Mary. So you're picturing all of these beings, and they're taking you out of yourself. So I'm not focused on myself. When we are self-focused, we tend to be unhappy. And when we are other focused beyond the self, we tend to be happy. So these studies find that hedonic happiness, ameliorating your happiness or your unhappiness a little bit by doing something pleasurable like that Netflix binge, it's okay. But eudaimonic happiness, where you're going beyond the self, that's causing surges of oxytocin, this amazing bonding love hormone. And now you have this feeling of love, but it's not for another person, even. It's in meditation, it's for the universe, it's for all living beings, it's altruistic. And that produces, that's what produces that 25 times huge flare of gamma in your brain. So it's fine to do all those things that bring us joy in that small sense, but after you've tasted the ecstasy of those elevated states, Sanskrit has words for those states, which we don't have in the English language, because in Sanskrit they recognize that these these local individual attachments are happiness. So they have words. But their basic word is praya for that hedonic happiness. But then sukha is a second word they have. That's for eudaimonic happiness. But that's just the start of the Sanskrit scale. Sanskrit has words for happiness that go way beyond that, that we don't even have words for in the English language. Words like ananda, meaning absolute bliss, vishoka, sorrowless joy. So in my book, Spiritual Intelligence, I get into those kinds of states. And once you've been there, one thing you have to make sure you have you have a plan to get back. Because when you've tasted that kind of ecstasy, we can lose people. They can just want to go out there and never want to come back. So we actually have to, every eco meditation track, every single one ends with a few minutes of grounding. Okay, let's put our feet on the ground. Let's look around the room. Let's count some numbers. Let's look at our watch and see what time of day it is. We want to ground you back there because, we want to certainly go out and be in these wonderful states of Vishoka and Ananda. But if you just go out there and never come back, then you aren't able to engage with your life. And the world now is in such a crisis. I mean, with climate change and inequality and all wars, conflicts, all of the things we've got going on right now, we don't need people who are spacing out into these elevated states and going on there and hanging out there. I mean, sure, in the Middle Ages, there was the mystical ideal is go out there like St. Francis of Assisi and just be out there. But he came back and he fed the poor, and we want to come back into our bodies and our lives and do stuff. Do things that are useful in the world. And so that means not only going to those elevated states, but then coming back and then doing something about climate change, about suffering. Right now we have refugees suffering. We have a terrible genocide going on in the Sahel, in Darfur, in Africa. And we can't necessarily go there and intervene, but we can do things to help. Personally, I've been training therapists in Ukraine to help those impacted by the war there. I want to train people in Russia as well. And like on the recent war that Israel conducted in Gaza left huge numbers of people suffering, and people worldwide have such empathy for the people suffering who were starving in Gaza, and rightly so. What they don't realize is the Israelis, some of the Israelis who were having to fire or told to fire at those civilians, went into utter crisis. And Israel now has a huge PTSD problem of soldiers who are told to point their weapons at civilians and pull the trigger. So the aggressors, the Russians in Ukraine, are as traumatized as the Ukrainians. And so despite all the wars going on, we have to hold even the people we may see as the aggressors in compassion. I'm getting really, I'm almost bursting into tears saying this because I feel these conflicts so acutely in my heart. And the best I can do, I can't intervene, but I can go train people to do trauma treatment in Ukraine, which we're doing. So you find things you can do. Go to your homeless shelter. This morning, I have a personal um, a personal commitment. If I see a homeless person, I will go and buy them a meal. It's just like non-negotiable. Homeless person, buy a meal. I went to the market today. I saw a homeless person. I bought a meal at the market. I went and talked to him for a few minutes and gave him a meal. So, can I fix Gaza? No. Can I do something small for the humanity and connection with that homeless person? It's only one homeless person. How impactful is that? It's not going to solve homelessness, but it's a human to human connection. And so do what we can, with smaller it may be, and that's the way the world can change.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to go back to the question that I put on hold because it actually ties in to this quite well. Let's talk to the young men out there who are listening. I have two sons. They're in, I guess, middle school and high school. And there's a movement online called the Manosphere. There's a documentary on Netflix. There's certain online influencers that are out there sort of promoting this kind of thinking. And for young men out there, we're three gentlemen here. We've had our life experience. We know what's right, what's not right. But the young people, they don't. They haven't had the experience yet. So they're just following what seems to be fashionable and what seems to sound cool. And in the Manosphere, they talk about happiness is for weaklings. Being happy means that you're weak. So rather, they say you need to be disciplined and a provider, and you need to be strong, and you need to suck it up, and don't be a weakling, so to speak. And this causes people, the young guys, to look at how to optimize and stack life hacks on top of each other, even if they're facing exhaustion and it goes against the values that they're holding inside, to just keep stacking it and don't pay attention to what is brewing inside. So I'm just kind of opening up this can here. Can you talk to that a little and your take on that, and what advice do you have for this young generation?
Yeah, I have my youngest son is in his early 20s. My eldest son is around 40. And so they're both really loving, articulate, compassionate human beings who I just love spending time with. And so kids and grandkids, just absolutely a central part of our lives. And I love seeing them develop and come into their power. And so, in terms of being a man, I personally want to make a difference, and I look for how I can make a difference. And that means connection, it means compassion. And strength isn't the ability to suck it up, strength is the ability to hold your space and fill your being with compassion for the people around you. That's also resilience. So what we find, for example, in the brains of people who are meditating, who are turning on that lobe of the brain that governs all those positive emotions, is we find that they are highly resilient. And as we fire those circuits of resilience, we wire them. And then when bad stuff happens, and I haven't lived a particularly charmed life. I've had a fair amount of tragedy in my life, as most people have had, but you have incredible resilience. Like, it's coming up on the 10th anniversary of a terrible night in my life when my wife shook me awake. I looked at the clock. It said 12:45 a.m. and she said something's really wrong. And I jumped up, ran outside, and there was a wildfire that was tearing down the canyon opposite our house toward us. And I just yelled at her, "We're getting out of here right now." And the power went out. We ran through the dark, threw on shoes, grabbed our phones, sprinted out to our car, and drove out as the trees above our head were catching fire. And it was a hellscape. It sounded like a artillery barrage because propane tanks were exploding in houses around us, gas tanks were exploding. It was just loud, just crazy thing. We drove out through the flames, and so it turned out to be a massive wildfire, destroyed 5,000 in our area. We barely escaped with our lives. A lot of our neighbors died. A lot of people, then when the power went out, they couldn't get their garage doors open. They couldn't open the gates in their properties, and they died. So it was this mass just trauma in our whole area. And so we went through 2 years of dislocation and living in rented houses, wearing borrowed clothes. It was just a long nightmare, but we were resilient. So we meditated. In fact, the week after the trauma of the fire, I was due to go and give a keynote speech at a trauma conference in California, in Canada. So I just flew up there and did that, and then did a week-long trauma training for therapists, and because that's it's what my job is. I just felt, what more could I do than go do that? There's nothing I could do back home. I mean, the house had burned down. We had no possessions, and I wasn't much use back there. So you are strong. That's what makes you resilient. It's meditation. It's compassion. It's love. It's connection. It's not sucking it up. It's loving the people around you. As it happened, I went and did my trauma work. I was supposed to do a month-long national tour after that. I canceled that to come back because my wife needed me there. So you recognize those things, but you're there for your children. You look them in the eye. One parent, when my kids were little, the next door neighbor, she said to me, Dawson, your kids are so quiet and respectful. They just talk to you in a normal tone of voice. Mine is screaming and yelling. And what do you do? What's your secret? And I said, well, Sarah, my secret is I listen to them. When they talk to me, I squat down. I don't loom over them and talk to them from a height. I kneel down. I look at them in the eye and I listen to them. They don't have to scream and yell. So, you want to have connection with the people around you. Being an authority figure is just hard and deprives you of that human connection. You want love. We human beings are meant to feel love. We have all the circuitry in our brains. We have mirror neurons in our brains to enable us to relate to other people around us. We feel this flood of compassion when people are hurting. That's why on the news, the leading stories are always about death and destruction and about injury and blood, because that's what we respond to as human beings. That's the dark side of trying to capture our attention with suffering. But we human beings have these empathy circuits. We have a whole lobe of the brain called the insula that is attuned to other people, to animals, to plants, to the earth. And so that's where being a man comes from. That's where strength comes from. That's where resilience comes from. And so what I would say to people who think it's all about shutting yourself off, pushing people away, being rigid about that, remember those studies about laughter, that children laugh 300 times a day. Would you rather be that old, sad, sour person? For one thing, age you dramatically fast. People who are traumatized, research shows they die about 20 years earlier. Okay. That traumatized person who hasn't dealt with their childhood stuff, that person has about a 20-year shorter lifespan than the person who's gone in there, healed themselves, learned to laugh again, and learned to love. So are you going to rob yourself of 20 years? Is it really your plan by being, by being what you think of as being strong? This is not the way. We're meant to be flexible. The people who are flexible, they're adaptable. When there is the fire, the divorce, the economic downturn, they have the resources to cope, like I did after the fire, because you have this inner strength that is not dependent upon things going well on the outside. Things can be going really badly on the outside, and you have this inner sense of strength. So that's where strength comes from love, and the strength that may seem to come from fear or rigidity, it's an illusion. It crumbles when it's tested. But love is so powerful. That's why I know long term, and in my books, I talk about this. I talk about the studies showing that long term human beings do thrive much better in compassion. So the data, the science, the evidence is all about connection. We get connected. If we're in a loving relationship, we will live longer. Men who are in a loving marriage live longer than men who are single. Men who are in a bad marriage live shorter than lives than men who are single. So relationships can degrade your quality of life. And not only that, it's not just the length of life, not just that 20 years of extra lifespan, it's the quality at the end. The people who have these limited worldviews and self-views, they also have more heart disease, more diabetes, more obesity, more hepatitis, more cancer, more Alzheimer's. You look at the figures for dementia, Alzheimer's, and you find that people who had that rigid style not only are much unhappier for their lives, they have these diseases again many, many years earlier, robbing them of their well-being. So just read the data, read the science, and it's absolutely clear. Read Spiritual Intelligence; it'll make you a believer.
Said.
Fantastic.
Ed, what was this name of this movement again?
Manosphere.
Manosphere.
Manosphere, like man.
Mm. I think we need to start our own movement called Man of Love.
Yeah, it's in Australia because my kids are going to school in Australia, in Melbourne, and it's got to the point where the school has had to have a Manosphere information session with the high school boys to address the issue because boys are going around quoting some of these horrible things that people are saying. It's quite misogynistic and it's quite divisive. Not everyone is that alpha male type of person, but they're telling you that you must be if you're going to succeed in this world.
Good. Well, we have data, and what I do when I have a perplexing question in front of me is I just I read the science, and there's usually good science that'll direct you in the right direction. So that's why I just love evidence-based research and the ability of science to give us answers because it does, and all of this information, like lifespan, health span, is drawn from really high quality studies, and so you get the reality picture from that, and that'll usually put you on a good path.
Mm, that's really incredible. Thank you, Dawson. Now, your website talks about tapping, EFT tapping. Do you want to tell us about that?
Tapping is EFT, emotional freedom techniques, is the practice of when you are experiencing stress, you stimulate acupuncture points. And there are only 13 of them that we focus on. And so you simply are rubbing or tapping these points while you work through stress. And it rapidly calms down that emotional center of the brain, the hippocampus. So people going through stress, people remembering childhood trauma, people remembering a car crash or a financial crash or a bad divorce or uh, an adult event that really hurt them, their emotional brain gets all lit up. When they start tapping, it's just amazing. In a few seconds, that reduces and all of that emotional charge in the emotional midbrain goes away. So that's what tapping is. We use it for stress reduction. We've done it now through our nonprofit, the Veteran Stress Solution. We've done it with about 25,000 veterans. It's what we're doing with the psychologists in Ukraine. We're training them in EFT. They're doing this now with soldiers, with children, with non-combatants, with civilians. So EFT very, very rapidly reduces the emotional triggering you feel around those memories. It's the best stress reduction technique I know, and it's easy to learn. You go on my website, download the mini manual, and within a few seconds, just try it for a few moments on any kind of stress or stressful memory you have, and you'll literally feel the stress just draining away as you shift your body's energy field through tapping. And again, we can read this out on energy devices like EEGs. We can see the changes going on in your energy system, especially in your brain.
Can we try it sitting here now? Like if someone's listening or watching to us, can we do like a quick 60-second practice?
We can do for about maybe 5 minutes if we have
Yeah.
that amount of latitude.
Yeah,
I don't want
sure.
to rush it, so I'll keep it to where it'll make sense to people listening who aren't watching. So the way you do it is you think about something that bothers you and stick to something that's recent and interpersonal. So within the last 2 weeks, something that happened with you and another person. So it's going to be recent and it's going to be personal. I don't want it to be a long time ago and definitely not childhood trauma because that needs to be in a therapy session with a trained practitioner. So recent and that was with another person. So you don't want to pick the genocide in Darfur because that's something that is much bigger than you can solve. But you can solve having had an argument with your spouse last week. So you pick those things. So think about something like that, and then rate it on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being no emotion. I'm all calm. 10 being I'm extremely upset about this. So you give it that rating on the scale. And you don't have to disclose what it is you're working on. EFT just works even if the person you're tapping along with has no clue what you're tapping on. You don't have to say, oh, I had this blowout fight with my wife over whether we should buy a new refrigerator or not. So you don't have to disclose anything about what went on, which is really handy when we're working with victims. They don't want to talk about their experiences, and certainly when we're tapping with the perpetrators, which we will do as well, they are not willing usually to describe what they did. So you just all you need to know is the number 0 through 10. So get your number, get your event, and I'm just going to quickly ask you both, Edward and Chuck, what are your starting numbers?
8.
7.
Okay, I'm just writing those down over here. So Chuck 7, Edward 8, and just give me one kind of trigger word that's handy to use in your own mind. So it could be if you said, for example, the refrigerator. I wouldn't know what it was about. No one in the audience knows what it's about. That you know what it's about. So what's just a trigger word for each of you?
Gym. The gym. The gym.
Jim,
Listening.
listening.
I was going to say Chuck.
Okay, good. So we've got our trigger words there. Now, and again, what I want you to do if you're listening or watching is I'd like you to write down your number and write down your trigger word. It's very important you write it down because we find that people's numbers drop so fast when they stop tapping, they go to cognitive dissonance. They can't believe 5 minutes later that they ever were that high a number. So it's really important that you write your number down. So write it down and then start by tapping on the side of your hand right below the bone that anchors your little finger on the other hand. So tap with your fingertips of one hand, on the other hand on the side of your hand, right below the bone that anchors the little finger. And just tap there if you're watching. Keep your eyes open for the time being. You will always keep your eyes open in EFT. It's just handy to keep focused on the outside environment and focus on the event. I'm going to pick an event too, one of my own. Now, notice that you're breathing. Notice you're safe right now. You survived the event and focus on the event while you tap. And while you're focusing on the event, just notice you're breathing. You're okay. You made it through. And the event was emotionally triggering. It was a real event. Did make you upset, stressed. Still does right now. And you're breathing. All these things are true. Got your number, you've got your event, and you're breathing, and you're safe right now. Now take 2 fingers and tap on top of your head, right at the very top crown of your head. Keep breathing and focus on your trigger word. Notice your breath, focus on your trigger word, focus on the event. 2 fingers again, tap where your eyebrow meets the bridge of your nose. You can tap with one side, on both sides. Doesn't matter. Either side works. Notice your breathing. Keep breathing deeply. Focus on the event. Notice your shoulders. Make sure they're relaxed. Make sure your body's relaxed. Focus intently on the event. Now tap on the sides of your eyes. 2 fingers. Keep breathing. Focus on the event. Focus on your word. Now tap under the pupils of your eyes. Notice your breathing. Notice that you survived. Now think about the very worst part of the event. So the worst part of that listening event, the worst part of the gym. What was the very worst part of it? It could have been something somebody said, a look that they gave you, physical sensation. What was the very worst part of this triggering event? And notice your breathing again. Tap under your nose. This is an important acupressure meridian. Tap under your lower lip. Another important meridian. Notice your breathing. Think back to the event, the worst part of the event. And then tap where your collarbones meet your breastbone. There's a little hollow right below your collarbones. Tap there. Notice your breath. Notice any deep breaths you take. You may have started to breathe deeper as you focus on the event. That's great. Focus on your triggering moment, the worst moment of the event, and then cross your arms and open your hands and tap with your fingers about level with your elbows. a little higher than your elbows. Open, flat hands. Focus on the event. Notice your breathing. Notice you're safe. You made it through. The event was triggering, but we're here now. Then one more time on the side of your hand, right below the base of your little finger. With the other hand, notice your breathing. Think about the event, the worst part of the event, about your number, and just notice you're safe right now. The event came and went, and you survived. You're okay. Maybe one of these events will kill you, but that one didn't. Okay, take a breath, relax, and now tune into your event again and get your new number. What is your new number around the event? Mine was about a 7. Mine is called email, and mine's gone down to about a 2. How about yours? How about listening, Chuck? Thinking about listening, what number are you? I'm sorry, you yeah,
Could it be a 0? Now I can't even remember, like, the
yeah.
feeling of how angry I was. Yeah. It was called a 3.
We get a lot of zeros, but could be whatever number is good for you. And if it's 3, then you can tap again. But it's down by, it sounds like somewhere around 2/3. And then when you're thinking about the gym, Edward, what's your new number?
4. And
4.
interestingly, I started measuring my heart rate when we started, which was 89, and it's gone down to 79. So it's dropped 10 beats per
Wow.
minute in that time as well.
Yeah, in one clinical trial, we found a 8% drop in heart rate as people, the base heart rate as people were tapping over the course of a week. So it does lower heart rate. So yeah, so that's the EFT. Very simple demonstration of it. There's a lot more to it than that, but just download the EFT mini manual off my site, and it's free. And then you'll try it on yourself and encourage you to start to use it for all these little annoyances of life. After a while, you become more resilient, you aren't as reactive, and your numbers generally will start to go down.
EFT stands for
Emotional freedom techniques.
And you created this, and what's the origin of all where you're tapping?
Yeah, these points were first written by human beings around 3,000 years ago in scrolls in China. And then we found corpses of people in Europe that go back about 5,000 years with acupuncture points tattooed on their bodies. And so these points have been known all over the world for thousands of years. Acupuncture uses them by inserting needles. Acupressure uses pressure on them. And techniques like shiatsu, Japanese massage, uses tapping on them. Qigong uses tapping on them. And then they've been popularized in the West since the 70s when people began learning about acupuncture, Chinese acupuncture. And then, like one in a book I'm working on now, I recount the story of a Western surgeon who was in China in 1970. And he watched a young woman getting open heart surgery, no anesthesia except for one acupuncture needle in her ear. Open heart surgery. She was smiling and chatting the whole way through. Open heart surgery with one acupuncture. So it blew away these Westerners when they first began seeing it. And then psychologists began to use it. Now we've used it with thousands of veterans. We've used it with all kinds of people in states of trauma, and it's widespread. But the basic formula was discovered and then formulated by a psychologist called Roger Callahan in the early 1980s, and he popularized this with a series of books, and it's gone on to become about 40 million people in the world use tapping all over the world.
amazing.
Widespread.
Dawson, we spoke about how you work with, I guess, clients. Do you have like an incredible story, like one that really stays in your mind, like a person that you've helped? They've gone from here to here, and
Yeah, there are some that stick in my mind, and one of them was a very interesting one of a man who served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. And we were talking at a conference center. We were sitting in a conference room, and there were people around, and a woman walked in drinking water, and she took her water bottle and just absentmindedly was crinkling it like this after she finished her water. And this guy was 10 out of 10 ready to dive under the table. He was so triggered. So I said, "You want to tap on that?"
Wow.
We tapped on the firefights and the loss of some of the people he was close to there. We tapped on some childhood issues with his parents, and we spent a while doing tapping. And the reason it was so striking is because we had a very good way of testing our results. We're not just on numbers 0 through 10. We had a water bottle handy, and after tapping, he could listen, same sound, no response whatsoever, back down to a 0. So we do that. We have veterans bring in lists of all of their life traumas, and our therapists and coaches just work with them one after the other. We'll start with maybe a recent one, like we did with you. We don't want to go right to the trauma. Usually want to go to something that is recent and that they can get a handle on. Because, I mean, a lot of them don't believe they could ever get free of PTSD. They may have been having flashbacks and nightmares for decades. And then we say, oh, you just tap on some acupressure points and it all goes away. Well, it does, but it's pretty hard to believe if, like me, I mean, I was so skeptical my first exposure to EFT because I just couldn't believe that, I mean, PTSD is going to go away in a few sessions. But that's what many clinical trials show actually does happen. Because when you regulate the energy body, when you tell the body you're safe with breathing and tapping while you're thinking about the trauma, we're not saying dissociate, we're not saying think positive, we're saying let's do some real negative thinking. If you're good, if you're a 10, you're going down, let's see if we can bring you up to a 10 again. We're ready to really go and deal with all of these traumas. So we actually, paradoxically, it's the opposite of positive psychology. We're really into negative psychology and processing. So yeah, we have many stories. We have about 5,000 stories on our website of people who have written in and said, I was reading one this last week, it was crazy. A guy who was a cocaine addict in his 30s, and he said it's like a magnetic pull. I can't get away from it. And the clinical EFT practitioner then tapped with him, found a childhood memory of being humiliated when he was 5 years old. And we tapped on that. His cocaine addiction went away. It just suddenly collapsed. And so not everyone is going to have that easy a cure, but it happens sometimes, and other times it's going to take you a while to get to the bottom of what is driving the addiction or the pattern. But there are about 5,000 stories like that on our website of people who just had shifts, big shifts in their lives, addictions, cravings, overeating, obesity. It's fantastic for weight loss because you tap and then again you aren't craving the food physically once you've sent your body those calming signals. So you just search the website for anything that bothers you. You'll find usually somebody else has posted a story about how it helped them on the website, and
Mm.
that'll give you some inspiration for your issues.
One realization I had when we were doing that practice a few minutes ago was usually when people are thinking about an event that caused some negativity or some trauma, they might think about the day that happened. So they think of it as the day. But what you pointed out was it's not the day. You can narrow that down to the location, you can narrow it down to the time, and you can actually narrow it down to the 1 second moment where the thing happened. That
Yes,
allowed me, when I was doing it, to push away all the other thing that I was associating with it and just focusing on that 1 second when a decision was made. That was it. And actually it was quite a small thing. When I guess myself and other people blow it out of proportion. Oh, I'll never see that person again. I'll never go to that restaurant again, or I'll never put myself in that position again. It might not be the restaurant or the person or the position. It might just be that one split second.
absolutely. And it's hardly ever the restaurant or the person. It's almost always something from your past. It's an ancient trigger. What's a lot of fun is to go work on the childhood wound and then find, like the cocaine guy, they actually never ever even tapped on cocaine. All they tapped on was that 5-year-old event, and the whole pattern of cocaine addiction just collapsed. So it's almost always that the thing that's bothering you now is a trigger for a much earlier problem, and you go to the earlier problem, tap on that, and often the later problems just fall away of their own accord.
We're going to do a lightning round, just a 60-second, some quick questions, quick answers. This is a fun part of our show. You ready?
Absolutely.
Okay. Question number 1. A peak state killer, That's the number one peak state killer in modern life.
Stress. Stress shuts down all of those beneficial networks in the brain. We naturally have access to all that brain activity. The moment you're stressed, boom, it's crazy to see on an EEG, just shuts down all your joy, all your creativity, all your resilience, and you are just left with that stress response.
And number two, peak state builder, number one peak state builder that costs nothing.
Breath. Tuning into your breath. You might forget everything I've said, and you'll probably forget everything you've learned in classes and read in books and your therapist told you in therapy. But when you're triggered, if you simply return to the breath, that is going to give you grounding in the body. And it's the body where we heal. So breath is the beginning of peak states. Go back to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali 3,000 years ago, and they tell you start with the breath. Benjamin Franklin, 250 years ago, said, if you're upset or triggered, take 10 deep breaths. So breath.
The most overrated wellness trend right now.
Wow. I read a lot about them, and I have friends like Dave Asprey who are biohackers, JJ Virgin, and I'm intrigued by a lot of the things they're doing. And the what people miss in wellness is how powerful the basics are. If you just get meditation right, again, we see that 20-year increase in lifespan from just stabilizing your emotions, releasing your trauma through things like tapping and moving to elevated states. You'd be hard put to find any other biohack that's going to give you 20 years. So all of them.
Wow.
It is so true. We do follow some of the biohackers that are out there, and they're always talking about the sleeping time, the food you're eating, the environment, the air quality, the fabric that you're wearing, your hot saunas, your ice baths, blah 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 blah. Like the list goes on. But I haven't seen one of them actually talk about just be happy, because that would actually probably supersede all of the other things, right? 20 years. I don't see Brian Johnson gaining an extra 20 years from going to sleep at 8 p.m. every night. But what you talked
And
about
and
today
and the
really
things they're
made
talking about
sense.
are gonna give you an edge, and they're gonna give you a little bit of extra lifespan or health span, and they're worth doing. But I actually do a lot of the biohacking stuff myself. Compared to meditation, they're molehills. Meditation is the mountain. Meditation is the big thing that's gonna produce radical shifts in your cells. In my book, The Genie in Your Genes, it's just amazing down to the level of your gene expression. It's shifting you. We did one study of EFT, 6 sessions, and people had radical changes in immunity and inflammation genes, that their immune controlling, and again, immunity and inflammation are the two big markers. Inflammation is the main driver of aging, and those inflammation genes in 6 1-hour sessions of tapping were just shut down. So again, these are simple things, and yet they are profound in terms of their effects.
Mm. You cannot argue with 5,000 years of wisdom and proven techniques, right? One sentence you want every high performer to write on their whiteboard.
Love yourself. Just love yourself. Do it from a perspective of love, because so much of our high performance hacks come from being demanding of yourself and forcing yourself to do more, forcing yourself to do things you don't like or that are hard. And again, you want to do things that are hard. I mean, if you look at flow triggers, and in Spiritual Intelligence, I have a bonus you can download as well at the end of one chapter, all about Stephen Kotler, my friend who wrote the book Stealing Fire with Jamie Wheel. Flow triggers. And so there are things you can do to induce flow, and some of them are hard. So don't shy away from hardness, difficult things, but do everything from the standpoint of love. My hard thing is mountain biking. I do demanding mountain bike challenges to myself, and they're hard. But again, they're exhilarating, and they bring you into these elevated states. Love, do them for love. Try to force yourself to do every single little biohack is just demanding. And if you can just relax and do everything you do from that heart-centered, caring place for yourself and your body as well as those around you. It's so powerful. So start with love. For what love isn't is fear. And so a lot of the striving is out of fear. I'm going to fail in some way. And that just immediately puts you into tension and distress, shuts down all those beneficial neurochemicals, and actually robs you of your longer lifespan. So do it with love.
One more question from me, then I'm going to kick it over to Chuck. Listeners, stick around. We have the 7-day challenge coming up before the end, so don't turn off just yet. Dawson, is it possible to meditate while you're mountain biking or running?
Yes and no. What happens is once you meditate for a while, those states do not confine themselves to your meditation periods. They start to so condition your brain that you begin to snap into these elevated states automatically when you're in other parts of your day. So you'll just be doing another activity, and suddenly you'll find yourself in this peak state, this elevated state, the awakened mind pattern. So meditation will tend to catalyze well-being in other parts of your day, and they will then start to shape your gene expression again in the whole part of the day when you aren't meditating. That's why some of these meditators have brains that are biologically 10 years younger than their chronological age. Again, no biohack will do that. And these are guys who've been sitting in a monastery just eating rice, but a brain 10 years younger.
And you admitted plenty of times before that you meditate when you run. You call that your meditation. So I'm not sure if Dr. Church, if you agree that he can accomplish the same thing while he's running that you otherwise would if someone did the ECO meditation themselves or like verbatim.
There are 7 different styles of meditation, and I discuss these in a book called Bliss Brain. And some people really get into it, sitting and being still. For others, it's movement. And so there are forms like Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, that movement meditations, Buddhist walking meditation, all of these will put you into these states. So I know when I go mountain biking now, I pretty much, I have such a strong association between being on my beloved bike and being in peak states. So I just put my hands on the handlebars. It's like magic. I'm in a peak state. So absolutely, you can get there other ways. It's worth though having a quiet time practice of some kind as well. So yeah, other some people benefit much more from moving than from being stationary. And there are 7 styles of meditation. I have people just cycle through all 7, see which one works best for you, puts you in those states, and then build that into your lifestyle. Build that time to run, to mountain bike, to do whatever turns you on. To ecstatic dance, fantastic. My wife just dances almost every night. She just puts on music and just dances all over the house for about an hour, and just like her thing. So learn to respect your particular way of connecting with the infinite.
I am literally going to laugh about 200 more times before I go to bed tonight because I think I want to reach that 300 laugh per day,
I'm
ceiling
so
every
glad.
single day. It's so interesting how these episodes just keep popping up at times that are completely close to everything else. Ed and I both have things going on in our lives. Because I was just talking about this with somebody else that we just need to get back to the times when we were younger and we didn't know what stress was. And all we wanted to do was have fun and laugh and just enjoy every single moment playing with Lego blocks. Just play. So thank you for reminding me of that again. And thank you for all this amazing wisdom you shared.
Dawson, let's talk about the 7-day challenge, our promise to the listeners. Can you just talk us through a 60-second practice that someone can repeat for 7 days that's going to be life-changing?
If you're doing it for 7 days, I would say follow that tapping routine every morning just to balance your energy system. So that's a simple practice you can do. And if you time the actual time you spend tapping, it was only a few minutes. So just do that. And then another powerful one is just the breath, just being in your breath. If you can't tap for some reason, just take those breaths and bring yourself to that mindful point. do this at the beginning of the day before you do anything else. For goodness sakes, do not pick up your phone. Don't start the day by looking at your phone. Love yourself first. That thing I wanted to put on your whiteboard. Love yourself first. Love yourself by tuning in, becoming mindful, starting your day. When you frame your day that way, you're gonna have a much better day. So just tapping and breathing at the start of every day is gonna give you that mindful frame for your day. After that, everything is gonna be smoother than it otherwise would be.
I shared with Chuck recently because Chuck actually visited me in China in December. I got married to the love of my life, and just a few days ago, maybe a week ago, she just said something out of the blue. She said, "I love our life."
Mm,
And that just, like, my hair was standing up on my arms when she said that, because number one, she didn't say, "I love my life." She said, "I love our life," which means that she
mm,
was including me in that love. And it also reminded me of just stopping and looking at the moment of time that I'm in right now. Everything is wonderful because, as you pointed out, that after midnight on sleeping in bed one night, your life can change in 1 second, right? So every time that our life is not down the toilet, appreciate it because we never know.
you never know. People die, people have unexpected reverses, and you just don't know. So you may as well live your life to the fullest every single day and ask yourself, what is getting in the way? And then letting those things go. Because again, you then are living each day fully. That gets to be your new normal. You have a biochemical reset. I mean, we've only scratched the surface of all of this on this podcast. And I have a whole chapter on set points, biological set points. You change your set point and you start to biologically expect that joyful experience every day. We're designed to live with that kind of joy. And so you reset your set point and then you just absolutely savor every day. I was eating today, this afternoon, I had a kind of an orange called a Cara orange. And I held this orange and I smelled the orange and I said, imagine if a blight wiped out all the Cara oranges in the world tomorrow, and this was the last one. How much would I enjoy this orange? So I enjoyed the orange that much.
I love it. Oh my God. And I
So
love
love
your
everything.
laugh too. I love your laugh too. I'm gonna record your laugh as my ringtone.
There's actually a downloadable version of my laugh on DawsonChurch.com.
Really?
There is. People were asking it about many years ago. So my daughter, who was a teenager at the time, held a microphone to my mouth, and she said, "Daddy, I'm going to tell you the funniest joke in the world." I looked it up, and this is the funniest joke. And she told me this funny joke, and she recorded me laughing. So yeah, that's
That is gold.
you want to laugh, yeah.
It's
Fantastic.
from the belly too. I love it.
Yeah. Chuck, final thoughts?
The 7-day challenge, I'm going to take that on myself. And, I would love to hear how everyone's doing with their 7-day challenge. Even if you watch this a year from now, go ahead and do that 7-day challenge.
Yeah, fantastic. Write your comments down below. Subscribe on that button there. Like over there. Watch this episode that's popping up here on your screen. Visit Dawson's website. We're going to put the link in the description below so it's easy to find him. And if this helped, share it with at least one high performer who is quietly fried. Dawson, thanks for being here. Less force, better state, more results. See you next time on the Masters of Wellness podcast.
Blessing. Thank you so much.